20 years. That's how long I gave to a man named Salvatore Bianchi. My time, my sweat, my loyalty. Together we built 7 restaurants from the ground up, starting with one greasy little kitchen and a dream big enough to burn through nights and marriages. But at 55, I found out how fast loyalty expires in someone else's empire. I wasn't fired because I messed up. I was fired because I'd gotten older, that's it. Different energy, they said. Fresh ideas, they said. What they meant was, we want younger hands and cheaper minds. My name's Dennis Farrow, and until 3 months ago, I was the operations manager for Bianci's Restaurant Group, a chain I helped turn from a single mom-and-pop Italian joint into a 7-location name across Ohio. I knew the business like it was part of my bloodstream. Suppliers, recipes, every broken freezer, every crisis at 2 a.m. I trained their managers, handled their scandals, and covered for their family mistakes when they would have torn the company apart. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because when life kicks you square in the gut and you think you redone, sometimes you realize someone saw it coming years before you did, and quietly built a safety net you never knew existed. This story isn't about revenge or even money, though both play their part. It's about what my parents, 2 factory workers who never made more than $50,000 a year, somehow understood about value that a millionaire never could. My father, Eugene, spent 4 decades at the Ford plant in Brook Park. He worked so hard his hands were permanently oil-stained. My mother, Dorothy, soldered circuit boards at Lincoln Electric until her eyesight started to go. They never moved out of their 3-bedroom ranch house. They reused foil, fixed what broke, lived modestly, quietly, predictably, or so I thought. I didn't realize until much later that behind all that simplicity, they were performing a magic trick that would change everything I thought I knew about wealth, worth, and love. But before I could discover that, I had to lose everything first. It happened 3 months ago in Sal's office, the same mahogany-paneled room where I.D. sat countless times helping him plan expansions. That morning I was told to sit across from him and his son Rocco, who was barely 28 and wore confidence like a rented suit. "Dennis," Sal started, looking everywhere but my eyes, "you've been with me a long time. You've done good work. But the business is changing." Rocco cut in, flipping through some charts. "We're going digital, modern marketing, influencer outreach, data analytics. We need leadership that understands today's landscape." I looked at Sal. "I can learn anything. I adapted to every change for 20 years. He sighed. "You're too old for this business now, Dennis. Too old." Those 2 words hit harder than any punch. I'd built his empire, worked nights, missed birthdays, covered scandals, and suddenly, I was a relic, disposable. They slid the papers across the table. Severance pay, non-compete clause. A polite way to say you're done here and then don't think about working anywhere near us. I signed. My hand shook, but I signed. Because after 2 decades of loyalty, I couldn't think straight enough to fight. When I walked out, the security guard I'd hired myself wouldn't even meet my eyes. 20 years of my life fit into one cardboard box. That afternoon, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the company logo I'd helped design, realizing I was officially too old to matter, but I had no idea that the real story hadn't even started yet, that in a few weeks I'd walk into a bank expecting humiliation, and walk out with a truth that would turn my entire life, and everything I believed about value, upside down. Rehook. They thought they'd buried me under that cardboard box. What they didn't know was that 40 years earlier, my parents had already planted the seed that would save me. 3 weeks after my 55th birthday, the hammer dropped. It was an icy Tuesday morning, one of those Cleveland days where the sky looks like wet concrete. I drove to the flagship restaurant, same routine as always. Coffee in hand, checking receipts, planning schedules. Nothing felt different until the phone rang. It was Marie, Sal's secretary. "Dennis, Mr. Bianchi wants to see you now. His son will be there too." That son was Rocco, 28, fresh out of Wharton wearing $1,000 suits and carrying a leather portfolio like it was a royal decree. He'd been hanging around for months, spouting buzzwords like rebranding and digital identity. taking notes on an iPad, while the rest of us worked double shifts to keep the kitchens running. I should have known that meeting wasn't about progress. It was an execution. When I walked into Sal's office, the air felt different, still rehearsed. Sal sat behind his massive oak desk, the one I'd helped him pick out at an estate sale. He didn't smile. Rocco was already flipping through his charts. The walls around us were lined with photos, grand openings, ribbon cuttings, handshakes, all of them proof of what we'd built together. In nearly every photo, I was standing beside him. "Dennis, my friend," Sal started. He'd never said my friend like that before, soft, apologetic, like he was already erasing me. "We've been reviewing operations. Things need to change. Change how?" I asked. Rocco jumped in. "We're restructuring. The industry's evolved. Digital marketing, data integration, influencer outreach. This isn't the world of 1999 anymore." I laughed once bitterly. "You're right. It's the world I helped build while you were still figuring out your Wi-Fi password." Sal looked down. "It's not personal, Dennis. You're from a different generation. We need fresh ideas, a younger team." That word again. Younger. Like age erased skill, experience, or loyalty. "Sal," I said quietly, "when the walk-in freezer broke at midnight last month, who fixed it? When your nephew was caught stealing, who handled it so it didn't go public? When your chef had a breakdown and vanished midweek, who cooked for 3 days straight? You think some kid with a TikTok account can do that?" Rocco's smirk didn't fade. "We're not looking for mechanics anymore, Mr. Farrow. We're looking for visionaries." My stomach dropped. I'd seen the playbook before, in corporate takeovers and quiet betrayals. Sal slid the papers forward. Termination. 2 weeks of severance for every year served. Non-compete for 50 miles. Effective immediately. I stared at the contract, then at the man I'd once called a brother. "You said I was family," I said. "You said what we were building was for all of us," he shrugged. "I have sons, Dennis." "You understand. Business is business." Something broke inside me right then. Not my pride. That had been taken long before. What cracked was belief. Belief that loyalty still meant anything. I signed. My hand barely worked, but I signed. When I walked out, I passed Tommy, the security guard I'd personally hired. He gave a small nod, couldn't even look me in the eye. I carried a single cardboard box through the lobby, 20 years of files, photos, and trinkets that suddenly felt like junk. In the parking lot, I stopped by my old sedan and watched through the glass wall. Rocco was already sitting in my chair, feet up on the desk, laughing on the phone. My desk, my office, my life. By the time I got home, it was barely 11 a.m. Joanne, my wife, was folding laundry when I walked in. She froze when she saw the box in my hands. "Dennis." I didn't have to say it. She already knew. "He fired you," she whispered. "Yeah." She sat down hard, the basket tipping over, clothes spilling everywhere. For a long time, she just stared at the floor. "After everything you did for him?" "After everything." We sat there side by side in a house that suddenly felt too quiet. For 2 weeks after that, I sent out resumes. Management, logistics, retail, anything. But the replies came fast and cold. "We've decided to move forward with another candidate." Translation: "You're too old." One recruiter even said it out loud. "Honestly, Dennis, my boss won't hire anyone over 50. Says older workers can't adapt." Our savings started draining. Bills piled up. The car made a noise that sounded expensive. Mitchell's college called about tuition. Renee needed new cleats for her soccer tournament. The water heater died. Every small failure hit like a reminder that the clock was ticking, and I was running out of road. Then, one sleepless morning, I went digging through my mother's old filing cabinet, looking for anything. Bonds, insurance, forgotten accounts. That's when I found it. A small yellow envelope marked Dennis, First Federal Bank, 1985. Inside was a tiny savings passbook, the kind banks used before computers. I almost laughed. I figured maybe a couple $100 were left, a forgotten teenage deposit. But that envelope, that single piece of paper, would turn out to be the key to everything my parents had been silently building for 40 years. I walked into that bank hoping to find a few grocery dollars, and walked out, holding proof that my parents had been quietly investing in me long before I ever knew what real wealth meant. The morning I walked into that bank, I felt like a man stripped of purpose. My suit was the same one I used to wear to management meetings, but now it just felt like armor from a battle I'd already lost. The passbook in my hand looked ancient, yellowed, creased, stamped with the name First Federal Bank, 1985. Inside the lobby of Midwest National, the bank that had swallowed First Federal decades ago, everything gleamed. Polished marble floors, digital kiosks, glass everywhere. I almost turned around, embarrassed. What was I doing bringing a relic from the Reagan era into a place that ran on apps and facial recognition? But something made me stay. Desperation, maybe, or hope disguised as habit. The teller, a young woman named Brittany, looked up with a polite smile that faltered when she saw the passbook. "Oh my God," she said, holding it up like an artifact. "I've only seen one of these in training photos." "Yeah," I said quietly. "It's old. I just wanted to check if the account still exists." She tilted her head, curious. "Let me call my manager." These go way back. A few minutes later, a woman in her 40s appeared, professional, confident, kind eyes behind her glasses. "I'm Patricia Holstead, branch manager. Let's see what you've got there." She led me into her office, small, neat, and thankfully private. She typed the account number into an old system still running in the background of their modern network. A black screen flickered to life, filled with green text like something out of the early computer age. Her fingers stopped mid-typing. Her face changed. "Is there a problem?" I asked. She hesitated. "Mr. Farrow, this account isn't closed. In fact, it's been active all these years." My heart gave a small, uncertain jolt. "Active?" "Yes, sir. And there's something unusual." She leaned closer to the screen. "This account has been making monthly deposits since 1985. I frowned. "That's impossible. I only opened it once. Put in $20 from my first job." She turned the monitor so I could see. "Not just your deposit. It shows $5 added every month from 1985 to 2010 under Eugene Farrow, then $10 per month from 2010 to 2015 under Dorothy Farrow." I stared at the names. My parents. They never told me, not once, not even hinted at it. Patricia kept scrolling. But here's the strangest part. Those deposits weren't left in savings. They were automatically routed into a brokerage account connected to this same ID, buying shares in something called Berkshire Hathaway. I blinked. "You mean Warren Buffett's company?" She nodded. "Exactly. It's very rare for anyone, let alone small depositors, to have an automatic investment set up like this from that era. Someone had to know what they were doing." I sat back, dizzy. "They were factory workers. They barely trusted credit cards." Patricia smiled faintly. "Then they were smarter than most of us. Because what they set up was one of the longest-running investment programs I've ever seen." She typed a few commands and hit print. The machine whirred for nearly a minute before spitting out pages of numbers. Patricia glanced at the sheet, her eyebrows lifting higher and higher. "Mr. Farrow," she said finally, "you might want to sit down." When she turned the pages around, I saw the number, $3,142,916. 34 eyes stared at it, then laughed once, a raw, broken sound. "That can't be right." "It's right," Patricia said softly. "Your parents bought fractional shares every month for 40 years. Compounded growth, no selling, no splits. Warren Buffett's stock doesn't split, it just grows. Slowly, steadily, patiently." I couldn't speak. My parents, the same people who saved ketchup packets and reused paper towels, had quietly built me a fortune. Not because they wanted luxury, but because they believed someday I'd need it. Patricia stood and opened a small drawer. "There's one more thing. A sealed letter attached to the account, to be released only when accessed by you." She handed me an envelope, yellowed, soft at the edges, my name written across it in my mother's looping cursive. My throat closed. I opened it carefully. Inside were 2 letters, one in my mother's handwriting dated June 15th, 1985. The other, a short note in my father's shaky scrawl from 2010. My mother's letter began. I had to stop reading for a moment because my vision blurred. The last lines nearly undid me. "The world can be cruel, son. Sometimes good men get thrown away. But if that day comes, remember, your value isn't measured by a paycheck. You are our greatest investment. The indecedmum, the second letter, my father's when it was brief, steady. Still adding money, son. Buffett was right about patience. If you ever need it, remember, we always knew you were worth more than anyone could pay you. Dad, I don't remember standing. I just remember Patricia gently handing me tissues and whispering, "They must have loved you a great deal." She was right. They had, more than I ever realized. I walked out of that bank with tears in my eyes and a check in my hand. But what they'd really left me wasn't money. It was proof that real wealth isn't earned overnight. It's built quietly through love, faith, and the belief that someday you'll rise again. I sat in my car outside the bank for almost an hour. The envelope lay open on the passenger seat beside me, my parents' words staring back in their old handwriting. Steady, careful, full of love. I read those letters again and again until the pages were damp from my tears. It wasn't just the money. It was what the money meant. My parents hadn't been rich. They'd just believed in something most people forget. That value, whether in people or in dollars, grows slowly if you take care of it. While I was out there giving 20 years of my life to someone else's dream, they were quietly building a safety net made of patience and faith. I thought about all those years. My dad fixing the same old Ford instead of buying new. My mom patching her shoes instead of replacing them. I used to think they were just being frugal. Turns out they were building something that would outlive both of them. When I finally drove home, I didn't say a word to Joanne at first. She saw my face and froze. What happened? I handed her the bank printouts and the letter. She started reading, then covered her mouth with her hand. "Dennis," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Is this real?" "It's real," I said quietly. They'd been saving him and investing by us for 40 years. Joanne started crying before I did. She sank to the kitchen floor, clutching the letter like it was holy. "Your parents. They saved us." Mitchell drove home from college that night. Renee sat at the kitchen table in her pajamas, reading the letter out loud through her tears. We laughed and cried in turns, disbelief mixing with gratitude. The numbers were life-changing, sure, but it wasn't about the millions. It was about knowing that two people who never had much believed I was worth that kind of faith. We stayed up until 3 in the morning just talking. About how my parents must have done it, about the lessons they left behind, about the kind of people they really were. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by my family, by laughter and tears and the smell of midnight coffee, I realized the real inheritance wasn't money. It was philosophy, patience, consistency, value, the very things Salvatore never understood. 2 weeks later, I knew what I needed to do. The non-compete clause barred me from working in any restaurant within 50 miles of Cleveland, but there was a loophole, starting my own. The clause didn't say I couldn't own one, so I did. I found a small brick building in Lakewood, just outside the restricted area. The place had history. It used to be a family diner back in the 70s. The sign was faded, the kitchen a mess, but the bones were good. It felt honest. I named it Eugene and Dorothy's. The first thing I hung on the wall was my parents' photo, standing in their backyard, holding a cake, smiling like they never knew they'd be remembered this way. Underneath it, I framed a copy of my mother's line. "Good things grow slowly, trees. Children, love, and money when it's cared for." Then I started making calls. Martha, 62, had been one of Beyoncé's best cooks until Rocco fired her for being too old to keep up. She answered on the first ring. "Martha," I said, "how'd you like to run a kitchen again?" She started crying before she answered. "You serious?" "Dead serious." Then I called Hector, 58, the maintenance guy who could fix anything. Rocco had replaced him with a contractor who spent more time posting than working. "I've got a place that needs your hands," I said. "And your heart," he laughed. "You finally got smart, old man." Finally, I found Louise, 67, a hostess with the memory of an elephant. She'd been let go from another restaurant because she wasn't tech-savvy enough. I didn't need her to be tech-savvy. I needed her to remember faces and make people feel like they mattered. Within 3 weeks, we were open. No marketing blitz, no influencers, no fancy rollout. Just a sign out front, some word of mouth, and recipes built on love and memory. We cooked. We served. We cared. And slowly, the same way my parents had taught me, the tables started to fill. One family at a time, one dinner at a time. By month 3, there was a 45-minute wait on Friday nights. By month 6, we had regulars who refused to eat anywhere else. I watched people laugh, connect, take photos not because of hashtags, but because they wanted to remember the night. And for the first time in years, I wasn't managing someone else's dream. I was living my parents' legacy. Then one night, as the line wrapped around the block, a familiar face walked through the door, and suddenly, the man who once told me I was too old for this business was standing in my restaurant, asking for a table. It was a Saturday night, the kind of night that used to make me anxious back at Beyoncé's. Long lines, full tables, endless tickets spinning on the rail, but now it just felt alive. The air buzzed with laughter, the smell of garlic butter and basil drifting through the room. The sign outside said 45-minute wait, but people stayed anyway. They said it was worth it. I was at the counter, wiping down glasses, when I saw him through the front window, Rocco Bianchi standing outside, scanning the room like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He looked smaller than I remembered. The $1,000 suits didn't hide the worry lines this time. He stepped inside, the doorbell chiming, and for a second, every sound in the restaurant seemed to fade. Martha froze mid-stir. Louise's smile wavered. Even Hector stopped tightening a chair bolt to look up. "Rocco," I said evenly. "Table for one?" He gave a nervous laugh. "Nice place you got here, Dennis. Packed house, huh?" "Every night," I said, not bragging, just telling the truth. He shifted awkwardly. "My father wanted me to stop by." Of course he did. Turns out the great Beyoncé empire had started crumbling. 3 of their 7 locations were gone. The digital strategy Rocco had pushed so hard had backfired. Too much money on influencers, not enough on food and people. The ones still open were half-empty, bleeding cash. "He wants to know," Rocco continued, clearing his throat, "if you'd consider coming back, as a consultant maybe? Senior operations director. He's willing to discuss terms." For a long moment I said nothing. I looked around the restaurant, at Martha teaching a young cook how to season sauce properly, at Hector laughing with a customer he'd just helped, at Louise delivering a birthday cake to Mr. Patterson, our Thursday night regular who'd become part of the family. They weren't staff. They were the heart of this place, the same kind of people Salvatore had thrown away. I smiled faintly. "Tell your father thanks for the offer." Rocco looked relieved for a split second. "But tell him I'm too old for his business." His mouth opened, but no words came out. I turned away before he could find any. Louise, bless her, called out from the podium, "Sorry, sir, we're full tonight. You're welcome to join the wait list." Rocco hesitated, glanced around at the full dining room, then left without ordering. The bell chimed behind him, and the noise of laughter and silverware filled the space again like the universe itself was exhaling. I went back to wiping glasses, but my chest felt lighter than it had in years. A week later, word got around that Beyoncé's had closed 2 more restaurants. Salvatore had retired to Florida, trying to sell what was left. The empire he'd built on ambition and ego had finally collapsed under its own weight. Meanwhile, Eugene and Dorothy's was thriving. We weren't flashy. We didn't need to be. We were built on something more permanent: trust, patience, and purpose. The same principles that had built my parents' fortune $5 at a time. Sometimes, late at night after closing, I'd stand alone in the dining room. The chairs would be stacked, the lights dim, and the only sound would be the low hum of the refrigerator in the back. I'd look at that photo of my parents on the wall, smiling, steady, simple, and whisper, "You were right." It hit me then how full circle life had come. Salvatore had chased fast growth and lost everything. My parents had believed in slow, steady faith and saved me. The irony wasn't poetic, it was proof. Not long after, a local business reporter came by, doing a piece on older entrepreneurs finding success. I laughed at the title, but when the article ran, people started stopping me on the street. "You're the guy with the restaurant named after his parents, right?" They'd say, "Love that story." And I'd always answer, "It's not just a story. It's a reminder. Patience pays." By the 1-year mark, we had lines out the door on weekends. I'd brought on a few young workers too. pairing them with my older crew so they could learn the craft, not the shortcuts. We didn't talk about engagement metrics or brand synergy. We talked about food, about people, about doing things right, even when nobody's watching. One night, a young customer left a note on the receipt. "This place feels like home. Thank you." I kept it in my wallet. It meant more to me than any business award ever could. But the real legacy of Eugene and Dorothy's wasn't the crowd or the profit. It was what came after. The lesson my parents left me was still growing, still compounding, and it would soon change more lives than just mine. By the time our second year rolled around, Eugene and Dorothy's wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was a living thank you letter. Everything about it carried a piece of my parents' philosophy: patience, care, consistency. The kind of values you can't fake in business or in life. The walls were lined with photos, not celebrities, but customers. Families celebrating birthdays, couples on anniversaries, old friends reconnecting over pasta. Above them all hung that same picture of my mom and dad standing in their backyard, holding a cake, smiling like they'd just won the lottery of simple living. Every morning, I'd unlock the door early, flip the chairs down, and take a moment before turning on the lights. I'd run my hand along the wood of the counter and remember the years I'd spent helping build someone else's dream. Now this one was mine, and it felt earned. We'd started small, but word had spread in the old-fashioned way, one customer telling another. No hashtags, no ads, just gratitude. Sometimes new faces would walk in saying, "My mom said I had to try this place as she told me your story." It always made me smile, because now my story wasn't just about loss. It was about rediscovery, of worth, of purpose, of time. I made a habit of sitting with customers asking about their lives. One evening, a man in his 60s said something that stuck with me. "You're lucky, Dennis. Most people never find out their parents believed in them that much." I nodded. "Yeah, but I think every parent believes it. They just don't always have the chance to show it." Business kept growing, but I didn't rush expansion. My parents hadn't built wealth by chasing more. They built it by protecting what mattered. That's how I treated the restaurant. I didn't want a chain. I wanted a legacy. We hired a few younger people along the way, kids who'd been turned away from other jobs for lack of experience. Funny, how that phrase sounded a lot like what I'd been told. Too old. Just on the opposite end of the line, so I paired them with my older crew. Martha taught one kid how to make pasta with feel, not just recipe. Hector taught another how to fix anything with patience and pride. Louise showed them how to remember faces, names, and stories, the kind of detail algorithms could never track. That mix, the old and the young. The patience of experience blended with the curiosity of youth. That's what made the place special. We weren't an empire, but we were alive. I also kept my parents' investment philosophy alive. I met with a financial advisor, a quiet man named Arjun, who'd worked with retirees his whole career. When I told him about my parents' 40-year patience with Berkshire Hathaway, he smiled and said, "They understood something most investors never learn, that wealth is a relationship with time, not risk." He was right. I left most of the money invested, just like they had. It wasn't about spending. It was about stewardship. Every month, I'd transfer a small portion into a scholarship fund for local kids who couldn't afford culinary school, especially the ones who'd been told they weren't a good fit somewhere. Because that's what the world does when it doesn't know your value. It labels you until someone proves it wrong. Sometimes, on quiet nights after closing, I'd sit in that same booth my kids used to do homework in and think about my father's hands. Rough, stained, tired, feeding a $5 deposit into a future he'd never lived to see. That's love, not the loud kind. The patient kind, the kind that believes in you when you don't believe in yourself. I wish I could have thanked him properly. Both of them. I wish I could have told them how their slow, quiet faith turned into something that fed hundreds of people every week. Not just with food, but with dignity. But maybe they already knew. Sometimes when I'd close up, I'd catch myself whispering, "You did it, Mom. You did it. Dad, you built this. You just didn't know it yet." Then I'd flip the lights off, step outside, and see the glow of the sign above the door, Eugene and Dorothy's, their names shining over the street, and I'd think about how life, like investing, rewards those who wait. I thought that was the end of the story, that the lesson was complete. But one quiet Sunday morning, an unexpected visitor walked through those doors, carrying something that would bring the past full circle. It was a Sunday morning, the kind where the sun cuts soft through the front windows, and the smell of fresh coffee lingers in the air before the doors even open. I was setting up the counter, humming to myself, when the bell over the entrance rang earlier than usual. A man stepped in wearing a faded blue suit. Took me a moment to recognize him. It was Tommy, the old security guard from Beyoncé's, the same man who couldn't look me in the eye the day I was fired. His hair had gone grayer, his shoulders more slumped, but his face was the same, kind, decent, weary. "Dennis," he said, voice rough. "Didn't know if you'd remember me." "I remember everyone who was there that day," I said quietly, motioning him to sit. He gave a tired smile. "Figured as much. Heard about this place. Heard it's doing real well." He looked around the restaurant at the photographs, the laughter, the hum of life. "You did what they said couldn't be done." I poured him a cup of coffee and slid it across. "Sometimes you've got to lose everything to realize what you were supposed to build." He nodded, staring into the cup. "I wanted to tell you. Salvatore passed last month. For a moment I just stood there. The noise of the kitchen seemed to fade. I hadn't seen or spoken to Sal since the day he let me go." Tommy continued softly. "Rocco closed the last restaurant. The Beyoncé name's gone now. Just thought you'd want to know." I took a slow breath. I don't wish him harm. I just wish he'd learned what my parents already knew, that loyalty isn't weakness. "It's wealth." Tommy looked up. "He used to say you were the heart of the company." Guess he was right. We sat there for a while. Two old men in a quiet restaurant sipping coffee and remembering a world that had moved on. Before he left, Tommy reached into his coat and handed me an envelope. "He asked me to give you this. Said he wanted you to have it." The handwriting on the front was shaky. Dennis inside was a single photo. Me and Sal, 20 years younger, covered in flour, grinning after our first grand opening. Behind it, a small note in his handwriting. "You were the best thing I ever built. I just didn't see it in time." I folded the letter and slipped it into my pocket. Not forgiveness exactly, but closure. After he left, I walked to the back of the restaurant. Martha was prepping dough, Hector fixing a shelf, Louise chatting with customers. I felt this quiet swell in my chest, pride mixed with peace. My parents' patience, my own heartbreak, even Sal's mistakes, all of it had led here. When Joanne came in later, she found me sitting in the booth by the window, staring at the photo of my parents on the wall. "Thinking again?" She teased gently. "Always," I said. "You ever wonder if they knew what it would all become?" She smiled. "Of course they did." That's why they kept putting those $5 away. That night after closing, I stood in the doorway and watched the lights flicker off one by one. Outside, the street was quiet. The sign above the restaurant glowed faintly in the dark. Eugene and Dorothy's. Their names still shining. Still alive. I thought back to the first time I'd seen the number on that bank printout. 3,700,000. Back then, it had felt like magic. But now I understood. The money wasn't the miracle. They were. They had invested not just in stocks, but in faith. Faith that time would reveal worth. Faith that their son would need a reminder that patience pays. I took one last look at the empty tables and whispered, "You were right." About everything. When I stepped outside, the night air was cool and still. Somewhere down the street, a kid laughed and the sound carried. I thought about how wealth works the same way. The echoes of good choices travel far beyond where they start, and maybe that's the real legacy. Not the restaurant, not the money, but the proof that love, quiet, steady, patient love, compounds too. Salvatore's empire faded. Mine never needed to grow that big. Because my parents' lesson was simple. Value doesn't vanish with time, it matures. And if you keep believing, keep working, keep investing in people, someday, when the world tells you you're too old to matter, your worth will speak for itself. Sometimes the greatest fortune isn't what you inherit, but what you become because someone believed you were worth the investment.